All right, guys, we're just about to finish topic 8. Wow, amazing. So I hope you've enjoyed this topic. It's super interesting with regards to how DNA kind of all works and how it's all passed down. So the reason why we want you to understand is that some conditions the humans are susceptible to is related to this DNA issue and how the DNA has been passed down to offspring, okay? So you can have genetic conditions or genes being passed down to your offspring, and there are many different patterns in how genes can be passed down. So, for example, there are different kinds of patterns of inheritance. I'm just going to open this up for you, just so you're aware of it. So, for your purposes, I just want you to aware that genes can be passed down to offspring, and you can do that following different kinds of inheritance patterns. Okay, so these are all the different patterns, and then these are some diseases that can result as a consequence of passing down genes. Okay, so I'll let you read that if you want and you're interested in that. So I think that also what I want you to understand is that it's not only about your genes sometimes. It's a combination of many genes, and then sometimes it's a combination of the genes and your environment. Okay, so some things, for example, schizophrenia has a large genetic component, but it's also has some environmental component. So usually, well, a lot of the time, you have your genes interacting with the environment that causes a certain disease. So let's have a look at that. Just a couple of examples so you can understand what I'm saying. So, for example, cystic fibrosis there is a gene. It's located on chromosome 7. Now, what happens is that particular bit of DNA is not right. So the bases aren't correct. So what happens is that when you make a protein out of it, the protein's wrong. So cystic fibrosis is the direct result of your DNA, your bases being incorrect, which results in making an incorrect protein. Now, that protein is actually really important because that protein is a channel that transports chloride. So why is this important? Because, look, this is a normal person, and this is the channel that's been made correctly. This is a protein that's been made correctly. So that protein, its job is to transport chloride ions out. But look what happens in cystic fibrosis. Your DNA wasn't right, so you didn't make the right protein, and so your channel doesn't work. So your channel doesn't work, it means you have a thick layer of mucus sitting on top of your airway. So can you see how important it is to understand DNA, how proteins are made? Because making incorrect proteins has a direct effect on the health of the person. Another thing to think about is skin cancer. Some skin cancers are actually purely genetic. Okay, for example, that some breast cancers, the one that Angelina Jolie, that's purely genetic. And then, so if you have that gene, you will get that cancer. But some of them, like I said before, it's about the environment as well. So it's the gene and the environment. And what can happen is that something in the environment can actually trigger that gene to be expressed. Okay? So something in the environment makes your cells use a specific part of DNA. Okay? So, for example, you can have normal airway, and then you start smoking, and the smoking causes a specific bit of DNA to become active and start making proteins, and then that could have consequences for your health. So that's what it's all about. So when you hear about genes being turned on, it means that that little bit of DNA is now currently being used where it never used to be used. Okay? So that is what that means when you hear that word. So for example, you can have perfectly good skin, and then you have exposure to the sun, which causes, then this particular part of the DNA to be turned on, which could develop into skin cancer. Okay? So I think what I want you to understand at the end of the day is, just because you've got a gene for something doesn't mean you're going to have it or you're going to develop it. All it means is that you are at risk, because if you already have the gene, something in the environment can make your cells start using that gene, right? So it puts you at an increased risk. If you don't have the gene, then it can't be turned on. But if you do have the gene and that little bit of DNA was not used and you're all good, happy days. But if that little piece of DNA all of a sudden is being used due to something in the environment, then that is going to result in disease. Okay, so it's all about genes and environment interaction. Because remember, we have two versions of genes. So so we have the one from mum, and we have the one from dad. Okay, let's just say, for example, this is for, say, I don't know, what can we think of? Say diabetes. Okay. So let's just pretend that, okay, at the moment you're using this particular part of the DNA, which means that, you're making insulin, not a problem. Okay. Then something happens in your environment, okay, say bad lifestyle or bad diet or something, and then all of a sudden you stop using that good copy and you use this copy that you got from your mum. And that copy doesn't work, or that copy is not right. So now all of a sudden you're not making insulin correctly. And then that's a problem. Okay? So you could have a good recipe for making insulin, and you're making insulin, no dramas. Then something happens in the environment that forces your cells to use the other copy. Then all of a sudden you're using the bad recipe to make insulin. And then now you're going to run into problems. Okay? So yeah, just something to be kind of aware of.